Thanks for hosting us tonight. Thanks for those in the audience. I mean, there's like people in the same exact, what's the word, like moment now, synchronized with us, and then strangers who may watch the recording. It's funny, I don't even have my book with me, but I have Ashna's book, so I'll hold it up. Because I'm reading from I'm gonna read from a PDF. That's really funny. I kind of like this. But yeah, just
I
really
have that book.
excited. Yeah, and
That's
Ashna and
the
I,
Most of. This is Root Fracture. I am super excited and honored to be here with Diana.
I think we're also supposed to describe how we look. I am Southeast Asian, Vietnamese American. I have shoulder length black hair, no bangs, no glasses, although I used to have both. And I'm wearing a really itchy wool plaid blue shirt. I think the itchiness helps you stay warm. I don't know. And Ashna, since you spoke to, I'll let you also describe your appearance.
Thank you, Diana. I am a femme presenting person of South Asian descent. I have long, wavy hair with bangs down to my eyebrows. I'm wearing yellow tinted glasses because everything gives me migraines. I am wearing a black shirt and a black cardigan.
Yay. So, the format that Ashna and I had decided upon was I'll just read for a chunk and then we'll just start talking. And if something I think organically arrives, maybe I'll read something. But mostly I'm more excited about talking. So, unless anybody would say anything otherwise in the chat, which I can't imagine, we'll proceed in this manner. And I also just want to say, like, this is really special to do this with Ashna. We met through Perry Plus. They are a fellow with Perry Plus, and I've been paired with different fellows for 2 years now. Yeah, almost 2 full years. Wow, I can't believe it. It's been a whole year with Ashna, and we've been lucky enough to actually have met in person a few times, and you'll be joining Randolph soon in the low-res MFA. Okay, but I guess I'm supposed to technically read from the book, which I'm not so good at. Okay, maybe some care advisories. Loosely, the work discusses familial violence of different forms. And maybe in the kind of larger context is exploration also of grief X number of years after my youngest sibling, so my brother's suicide in 2014. But that's kind of less direct in this collection, Root Fractures. And I'll be saying some Vietnamese words, and that's okay if folks don't know what that means. And that's kind of intended. We can talk about language as well. Okay, so there's a lot of poems in the book that have the same title. And that title is Doi Mới. And for a long time, I actually didn't know how to pronounce that. Because for a long time, only until like maybe like this week, I've been illiterate in Vietnamese. I say only until this week because I took my Vietnamese final this week and like Vietnamese 1, I know. And I think I did okay. But I think I did that thing where it's like I found the answers to some of the questions elsewhere in the test. Like the test helped me take the test. Anyway, so I'm a good test taker. I'm a product of the American educational system. All right, I'm just going to read. Doi, moi. At the site where the wound will occur, we know that she was in the garden, the one she had cultivated, seed by seed, shortly after moving in with her husband and their 11 children, all of them together again after years of separation. Her husband's and son's feet in America, her daughters and hers in Vietnam, first in Saigon, then a place unmentioned by the coast, underground, in hiding, waiting to make a successful bribe so they might board a vessel, any vessel, collective bride in dark waters facing an unknown stage. Boom, boom, she whispered to my mother. Butterfly, the word my mother used to reference our genitals, two cupped wings like a heartbeat. Boom, boom. In hiding all that year, unmentioned by the coast, My mother, as a young girl, had her first period, its dark liquid unseen in their nest underground. Boom, boom, the smear of red between my thighs, perfectly symmetrical. Two lips pressed together, as if to kiss or to strike. So, in my misreading of the phrase, um, I didn't, it changed my understanding, of course. And Vietnamese is a tonal language. So I used to think it was pronounced something more like doi mới, which means like a new sky, like kind of like literally. But what it actually means is more like a new, like renovation, like not renovation, innovation. I think renovation kind of works too, honestly, all the Asians. Um, but it refers quite specifically to a period of economic reform in Vietnam, kind of officially starting in the late 80s or mid 80s. And basically, when like Vietnam allowed for its kind of economy to thrive in the way, and that takes us all the way to the kind of current day moment. And so it's a very specific economic time in Vietnam. But because I didn't know that, and because I thought it was like a new time, I use it like I think that both kind of work, even though they're very subtly different. And I'm really interested in this notion of like how we misread things and how that changes how we understand something. And maybe this is also my relationship to the language, which I think the book kind of captures my illiteracy in Vietnamese. But uh, how do I describe this? Basically, maybe about a year or two after my brother died, we found some home videos that my family had recorded when we were kids. And my sister and I got them digitized and started watching them. And in watching them, we realized that one, my first language is Vietnamese because 4-year-old me is speaking in my father's Southern dialect. And two, like I had no comprehension of like, who is that? I mean, I know that it's me, but it's like, who is that? And so in trying to learn Vietnamese now as an adult, it's like deja vu, or maybe having amnesia and slowly getting your memories back. It's kind of both at the same time. And it's kind of resulting in a funny relationship with two different languages that I work with. Đôi mới. Sometimes the skin surface needs to break or be cut for healing to begin. The majority of antivenins are administered intravenously. That is, they take place within or inside a vein. Fang into flesh, needle through, then under the skin. In a lab, someone will seek to understand the biomechanics of spider fangs so as to inspire new medical devices. Into her body, my father's mother administers insulin. When examined up close, our pores make up a canvas for needlepoint. Health questionnaires do not ask if there is a history of violence in your family. To the question not asked, I want to ask, how many generations should I go back? When I dress exactly as my mother did on her honeymoon, is it not mimicry? One creature evolving to resemble another in advantageous anti-predator adaptation? But what if your predator also looks like you? So one of the videos that we uncovered is and was my parents' wedding and like honeymoon videos. And at the time that I was watching them, and like it's so weird to like see your parents before they were married or like before they had kids. And it was also kind of uncanny because I had the same haircut and I was close-ish in age to my mother when I was watching this. And it was like it's fraught because of the thing I haven't told people, which is like you right like this yet, which is like that my mother was also the primary abuser in my family. And so it was so startling to see her, but then also to see me and to kind of like map it. Like, 'cause of course my brain like finds likeness and like matches it. And I've my whole life I've been trying to resist being like my mother. Um, and at the same time, I also had like tremendous I don't know what the word is, like affection for this like young woman whom I didn't know like then. And actually, what I do know is like she went from living in her parents' house, where she got married. They got married in the living room of the house. And then the next day, all of a sudden, she was married and then she was on a honeymoon. And she had never lived one day of her life away from her family. And my father likes to say that when they were in Hawaii, my mother just cried all the time because she was homesick. She missed her family. And it wasn't an arranged marriage. He wasn't a stranger. They totally dated, but she had never, like she had never been away. And so I had to figure out how to reconcile what I felt for this young woman with what I know about the mother and the kind of mother that she was, because she's both, and she's not a monster in a vacuum. Um, okay, that was kind of a long preamble to maybe dive into this next poem. It's called Again, and it's after the playwright Melissa Tien. She also lives in New York. And it takes the kind of recursive modality. So every time it says again, the plot, I guess, the engine of the poem starts back up again. It's almost as if it's operating on kind of like these different multiverses. I think it should make sense once I start. Again, a woman gives birth, and a new word gets added to a list of those that describe her. This too will befall her, she fears. But she has another daughter, then a son. Then she forgets about her daughters. At least, that's what you think. When the son dies, the family forgets themselves a bit more than they usually do, like a hole that expands only to contract shortly thereafter. Again. Because she could not forget the labor pains, as she could not forget the country left behind, the mother decides one child is enough. With her husband, she teaches the daughter that everything has at least two names: water, Nuluk, Nuluk, country. They encourage the daughter, as they would have encouraged all their children had they had others. But you have to be practical, they tell their only child. Again, they tell her, remember Dr. Seuss? You are only limited by what you can imagine. Oh, the thinks you can think. The daughter learns to swim, to start a fire, teepee, and log cabin, to make tonkatsu. She fails at first, but gets back up, fails and gets back up. Each time she fails a little less, then finds new ways to fail. The mother does not tell the daughter that this is how you transport yourself to a new again. Every few years, the mother and daughter return to Vietnam, wandering down alleys until they eat their way back home. That would have been me, the daughter says, nodding at a woman picking up noodles, soup for her child and her parents next door, she thinks. The mother points at a figure striding into a temple, ao yai curling like incense. No, that one is me, pointing instead at a woman on a motorbike, balancing market greens and three children. Amid the din of street traffic and sizzling meats, the faint sound of a drum, someone's hand testing tension on stretched buffalo skin. And if the end of the war wasn't the end of anything, and the war was what it was, another plastic bead on a string of worthless beads, she would have endured the lean years, finding herself married, a man, then a bawai, indoi, mai. Every day, sorry, every Friday, she would eat with her grandchildren at their favorite stall, and her Jow would show her what they made, gifts she stowed on the windowsill beside her bed. Again, she never marries, throws herself deeper into school, helping her mother with the secret pharmacy. When you are forced to disband, keep on going, just underground. Again, she marries later, after finishing school. In the lab, she meets her future husband, and when they welcome their first child, a son, he looks just like the daughter they didn't have. She marries later, yes, says, perhaps we stop at one, after giving birth to their son. But the husband always wanted daughters, so a compromise, a tear which becomes a chasm begins again. A catch in the shower where all their long hairs tangle, slowing Nook down the drain. A bandaged hand does nothing to soften a mother's blow, but you can strike with words, the child learns, striking to stop the blows received, not realizing how a shield also cuts. No, again. Exasperated, the mother says something she shouldn't have. Her daughter snaps back so fast the mother nearly flinches. Then silence, like a box of bullets, nestles in. Two strong women in their difficult hour. The mother does not see or hear from her daughter for several years, and it is as if a time comes when neither daughter nor mother should have to respond to one another anymore. I was thinking of you, neither of them writes. Oh, the things you can think. Again, the mother pops into her neighborhood library for the first time in years. Time, like a great distance, can make an alien of you. She misses her children. Perhaps she sees them again, reading to each other, rifling through the picture books. Again, the mother doesn't have a daughter. The daughter, she doesn't have children of her own. When they meet by chance as tourists at a boat show in Way, they realize that they are both poets. What are the odds? Drifting along the perfume river, a boat peers into a mirror. What's the difference between a mirror and a window? You see yourself in one, your ghost in the other. Again, a ghost can host another, a mother. Trong mời thứ bạn là bạn trong mời thứ. The daughter takes her own life because it is a way of taking her mother's. Again, when the daughter miscarries, the mother flies over immediately. They sit on the daughter's bed, peeling and passing a pomelo between them. That which leaves the body cannot re-enter. Again, out on the ice, the daughter jigs her line, hoping for a bite. Below, hundreds of fish thrash and bruise on their way to spawn. They will spawn or die trying. Only after she guts her catch does the kokanee yield its clutch of eggs. Something inside the daughter's body drops. Why is time always running out? Hello, says the mother. Hi, Mama, says the daughter. Is everything okay? Yeah, just cleaning and thought of you. A voice, like a seam, can bridge a rupture, but language fails eventually. In a memory from before or one to come, the mother and daughter walk the foam line of a beach at dusk. The evening fog which kisses one kisses both. Perhaps one is carrying a small child or letting go an old ghost, or one holds her mother's hand, and the tide flowing and receding inches further inland, like a palm erasing where they have been. I'm still fairly, I guess I'm somewhat literate in Vietnamese, but I don't even remember how to translate the Vietnamese sentence, which is kind of funny. I mean, I can always Google it. And I kind of like that. It's like my deja vu has re-entered. I think I'll just read one more little one and then we can kind of chat, Ashna, because I'm really excited to chat with you and so grateful for your time tonight. Okay, it's a little one. Cape disappointment. Nausea arrives like showers sweeping the sandbar, toes edged at the jetty. How our bodies move us and how we move our bodies. How do middle-aged orphans fight over their mother's funeral rites? By watching a bruise form where a brother has touched. The unexpected flush of beach strawberries early in the season. Okay. Thank you for listening. I love that it's just Ashna's face on my screen, with the poems. Um, yeah. Okay, so I feel like we should chat. Um, and then, yeah.
First and foremost, thank you for that beautiful reading. I've always loved listening to you. And one of the really interesting things about listening to poems that I know so well as objects on the page is that listening to the poems also reminds me of one of my favorite things about your work, which is that it so frequently sort of tests and challenges what my understanding of what a poem is and what it can look like and what its purpose is on the page as a storyteller and a vehicle and as its own sort of contained moment in its own right. So for folks watching this or watching the recording of it who are unfamiliar with Diana's work, I'm going to hold up some pages that are characteristic of the kind of multimedia experimentation that Diana's work so frequently engages in. So that is a prose poem. Um, I don't even know what the right word is. Overlaid, I suppose, over a photograph. Tug is written with this blank shape in the middle of it. And most notably, several poems are written where the text takes up the space that human beings from family photographs once did before being cut out. So I would love, Diana, if you could talk a little bit about your relationship between image and text and what inspires or drives you to play with photography and these particular shapes and multimedia, erasure, concrete poetry. What is the relationship between the stories that you're telling in these forms and what inspires these forms?
Sure. I feel like such a capacious invitation, Ashna. So thank you for that. I can also share my screen when I talk about them too. Um, and yeah, I feel like to answer this question, I'm going to go back a little further back, which is kind of embarrassing, but also like whatever. It's just what happened, which is when I was an undergrad, my mentor, Calvin Bedient, he brought in Claudia Rankine's Don't Let Me Be Lonely. And I remember being so shocked to see like a literal image in the middle of the page. Like, no big deal. There's a TV, or, and I don't even remember what the homework was for that week, but I remember it really gave me permission. And I started to do, it's actually really funny. I think of that early work as definitely a precursor to my more recent work, but I didn't do any of that in between, which is wild. So what I did was, um, I was actually, I think this was probably my last year of college. I was commuting from home. And, my relationship with my parents is really fraught. And I remember walking down the hallway that led to the kitchen, and we had all, we have all these like family photos. And I remember feeling like this is so like these are all lies, like we're all smiling and my mother has posed us in these outfits, but these are all fucking lies, right? Because it doesn't reveal the terror, right, that we feel. And so this is before smartphones. I took my little point and shoot. I think back then it was like, whoa, it has like 6 megapixels, And I took a picture of each of them and then I uploaded it to my computer. And I just dropped each picture onto a page. I didn't know what I was going to do with them. And then actually what ended up happening was I made a text box over each picture and I actually started writing these tiny poems that were actually like picture frames around the pictures. Um, and I didn't, when you're what is it? Like I was pre-law, didn't even know what an MFA was, just taking poetry classes for fun, totally inspired by Claudia Rankine, doesn't even know who she is, just making stuff because I felt mad. And I remember my professor's reaction. I think he was like, "You've invented a new form." And he was like, "This." He's like, "You know what?" He's like, "Diana," he's like, I wish I could do this." And I was like, "You can." And he's like, "No, that's your idea." And I was like, "I don't care." Like, I didn't like, I'm an English lit major. Like, I know about, like the metaphysical poets. Like, I know that they wrote stuff in shapes. So, like, and there's also like John Holland. I mean, there's a whole history of concrete poetry, as you kind of touched upon, Ashna. So I was like, I didn't make that up. But I just remember his enthusiasm, and I never did again. And then, many, 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 many years later, an MFA later, a PhD later, or actually not even a PhD. I think this is like actually during my PhD. Well, my brother died, and actually, 2 years before he died, he had cut himself out of these family portraits, the same hallway. So he had rage, gone through that hallway too, and his reaction was just to take an X-Acto knife to cut himself out, just to slice, and then put all the pictures back up. So he just took what he felt was his, which was his image. And it was really haunting. My parents didn't talk about it. The picture stayed up in the halls of the house. And it was scary for us to like walk through it. I didn't live there anymore. And then he died. Excuse me. He took his life. And so then it was like this even scarier because it was almost like a harbinger of what was to come. And then we still weren't talking about it. So there was so much shame and guilt. And I didn't have language. I can talk about it now totally retrospectively, but at the time it was just so big and so yucky feeling. It's funny because I feel a little tender today because I had therapy and it was like hard because we're actually like 5 days away from my brother's death anniversary. And we were talking about my ability to intellectualize how I feel, but not be able to feel it. And I was like, I don't know how to feel the feeling that I know is in here. Anyway, so what I usually do instead of feeling is I work through materials. And so that first anniversary of his death, I had my sister scan the pictures where my brother had cut himself out, and I began to like type into them and type over them and work with them, and actually became this kind of ritualistic practice where I revisit it. So it's kind of like you can kind of see my early roots, right, based on my English training, but like English lit training, and then being inspired by Claudia, but not really coming back to it, right? So like I mean, I love John Hollander's The Swan, the Swan poem, but like, why would I do a swan poem or a frog? Like, why? It doesn't have any significance to me. And then, unfortunately, like my difficult material prompted me to. Um, and it actually, I have to say, like, it came out of an impulse not to make poetry, but to kind of mend the archive, to unhaunt the thing that was like really freaking me out. And also a desire to do it, to share it with my sister. And she was the person who found my brother's body. And so we both got like lots of trauma, lots of difficult feelings. And so my impulse in like working with the pictures initially was just to denature their like not good feelings. And just it was a private affair. And of course, it became public because I decided, I mean, I couldn't stop doing it. I made so much of it. I'm still making it, and I've been publishing it. So that was a long way to say, like, you know, um, I don't, one thing that I do want to share that's important here, like, I don't have training in visual arts. I love art, but like, I think the imposter syndrome would totally have prevented me from working outside of my main medium. I can write an iambic pentameter, like, but like just working with these photographs gave me permission to noodle around and play with the visual realm because it's fun. Because the subject material is not fun, but the playing is fun. And sometimes it's nothing, and sometimes it's like, oh my gosh, like that's weird. I like that. That's part of a thing, right? And so now I really hold, Ashna, like I lean into that. I'm like I learned a new program this semester because I'm taking installation video. It's called Map Mapper. It's so cool. It like it could basically like you could take anything. You can like point it at you could basically hook it up to a camera and point it at a space, whether it's like your doorway, and you basically like trace or create a mask over your doorway, and then you can create a video projection that only projects in the exact contours of your doorway or your lamp or your window or your sofa. It's so cool. Like I was just like, just like tracing random shit just to, like, woo, it's kind of like you're like, I'm gonna draw a door and then like now I can project art onto the door. But I do this because when you're learning a new thing, you still have training in like art making, like making creative things. And so like you'll recognize when something kind of weird and fun is happening. And I'm always trying to figure out that weird and fun thing without trying to actively make it. Like I don't sit down and go like, oh, today I'm gonna make a thing that looks like this. Because
Mhm.
I'll always be mad because like I'll never be able to do it. And that's how it was when I was a kid. Like I could never draw a flower or a bunny, And I was like, this is so ugly. And now I'm like, oh, I'm not supposed to try to draw a bunny. I'm just supposed to like watch videos of bunnies, not think about a bunny, eat a snack, and play with Illustrator, and then like something unrelated to a bunny, but somehow a bunny comes back into it. Wow, that made no sense, but it actually is my process. I see you unmuted yourself. I feel like I was ranting, so I'm gonna stop. What about
Um,
you?
I do actually think that made sense because I've been thinking about the relationship between ghost of and root fractures, which treats a lot of the same material. You can really see that you're sort of in this lifelong relationship with this archive. But in root fractures, there is this near scientific focus on ecologies of fracture,
Mm,
healing, renovation, your focus away from the sort of metaphysical supernatural to the earthly and the physical and the scientific is really visceral.
mm,
There's a bunny that runs between one text and the next. So I would love to hear you talk about that. Like it's the same archive, it's the same
yeah.
material. You're coping through the similar anger as well, trying to find different forms of formal fun, seemingly. Right. But the thematic thrust is also different. What turned you toward the more earthly?
I never had a question like that, and I love it, Ashna. I think as you first started asking this question, I was like, is that me? I was like, it is me. Oh my God, I didn't even know, you know. But I did know. Um, I read a lot of animal behavior, and I'm married to like a biochemical engineer
Mm.
who loves nerding out whenever I ask him a question about something. He just happens to know like he's better than like the internet sometimes because I could just be like, why is this? I'd be like, oh, and then later, okay. Well, this is before he like learned what mansplaining was, and then he realized like he was worried that he was mansplaining, and I was like, no, mansplaining is when you tell me something I already know. I'm actually asking you these science questions. What a sweet guy, but like,
I love this.
um, but as I would like, anytime I would read about something, whether it's like monarch butterflies versus viceroy, I don't even know how to say that word, viceroy butterflies, which are the kind of copycat
Mhm.
monarchs, but they aren't. Um, I just, everything felt like a metaphor and analogy for human behavior, whether it's like how my mother's siblings were like at at odds with each other, but couldn't like it was like a weird codependent relation, like just everything, and I really leaned into how other animals behave because sometimes it's too hard to suss out what's happening in the personal realm, you know? Um, and I think in thinking ecologically, that relates to grief in the sense of like, it was just too big to think about my brother dead. Like, of course, I know people die, but I've never had anybody like who shared a childhood with me die, and I don't know what that means. And one thing that really kind of helped, like I feel like calm down my anxiety um, about his death was just like, oh yeah, like whatever. We're just like weird particles, and now he's just scattered like particles, in the atmosphere. And sometimes it rains down into the waters, and then it goes back up into the atmosphere. It's just like this cycle, and it doesn't mean anything to me, right? Like, um, and it's just like we're all dust. Of course, we're all dust. But just like knowing that he's like, yeah, part of that earthly and atmosphere, um, helped, I don't know, helped like ground the grief for me, if that makes any sense. Because I don't subscribe to any notion of afterlife. And then actually it also helped me to fashion an afterlife that I subscribe to. But like it as a narrative. Yeah. Oh my gosh, Ashna, I've not told you this. So it's based on The Leftovers in a way. The
Okay.
HBO show The Leftovers, which I watched right after my brother died around that time-ish. So it was like total like intense grief, drama. And then I was like, I love this show. Everybody's like sad, because they all lost people. But anyway, so like the basic premise, it's based on a Tom Perrotta book of the same name, I think. Yeah. Oh no, maybe it's not the same name. But anyway, essentially it's a thought experiment. Like, oh, what if the rapture does happen and, X percentage of people disappear suddenly?
Mhm.
So in the show, like I think it's like 3% of the world's population vanishes, on in one moment, in one instant. And then, the world is kind of left reeling in the aftermath, right? Like religions are kind of moot because it's like religions couldn't like explain it, all the different religions. And it wasn't like all the bad people went or only the good people went. It was like both, like the pedophiles and the saints. So it was like it was senseless, in a way, babies and old people. And this is kind of a spoiler alert. But in the last and final season, there is a moment where you're like not even sure if it's like a story or if it's an actuality, but basically somebody has hired like some physicists to transport them to where the departed have gone. And she comes back. I know, it's kind of amazing. She comes back and she says, we lost 3%, but they lost 97% of the world. And they all had to find each other. I know. And so that blew my mind. And then that combined with like, I hate it. I hate so much to think like, okay, so this year would be the 10th anniversary of my brother's death. I hate thinking like, oh, he would be 34 this year. That fucking sucks. That's an impossibility. So what's been more healing for me is to think like, oh, when he died, he's in this like inverse world where he's a newborn. So instead, I think in a kind of positive moving way, he's going to be 10 this year, thinking about middle school, and then like 2 years ago when my father-in-law passed, and this is so creepy, same day as my brother. So we were already like sad. I know, it was so bizarre. I remember at the ancestor altar to my brother, I said, "Hey, look out for baby George. Like he can tell you all about his son, and you can meet my spouse that way. But take care of him, like look out for him." Um, and I'm thinking a lot about like these inverse worlds. I don't even know how we got to this. Oh, I guess ecologies. But that's also kind of made me thinking about like multiverse and multiple valences of possibility. Like, do I believe that that's actually in existence? No, like it's just like a thing that I like to think of him there when really like I know that his physical matter is like just part of the universe.
People who spend many of their lives contemplating fracture and displacement because we are the inheritors of various historical traumas, multiple movements, have aspects of our identities that are in fact in conflict with one another, can't help but think about parallel lives.
Hmm.
Who would I have been had I been born and raised in Bangladesh? Who would I have been had I chosen to, I frequently write about an abortion that I had. Like, who would I be now had I chosen to have
Hmm.
a child? Who would that child be? And how do I talk to that possibility as a voice that can speak back or as a container that can hold
Yeah.
that experience? There is nothing scientific or religious about that psychological
Mhm.
exercise or that sort of exercise in metaphysics. And I think we really, poetry is an important place to sort of think through those
Mhm.
alternate forms of imagining so that we're not limited by the earthly more than we are inspired by the earthly to think about possibility. I
Mhm.
really love the poems where there's one particular poem where I believe the speaker and her mother are walking through a city in Vietnam and
Mhm.
pointing at women they would have been.
Yeah.
And that really, really struck me for a variety of reasons. In part, this alternate life thing. And to share that so viscerally and out loud with one's mother, who is often the reason for displacement of a particular kind. We're not able to choose the families we're born into or the locations of them.
Yeah.
But personally, I can't imagine having that conversation with my mother. You were talking about your mother earlier and the importance of both honoring the traumas that we experience at the hands of our abusers and putting those people in really important historical and psychological contexts to not
Mhm.
make monsters of them.
Mhm.
And I struggle with this tension all the time. And I just wanted to hear you talk more about how to expand this sort of theater of trauma to the actual world in the world of your poetry and sort of what the consequences of that are for you personally.
Yeah, that's a huge question, Ashna. Um, Before I answer that, I wanted to share something. I had a professor once, not in English literature, I think actually in maybe communication studies, and I don't know, I haven't verified this in a long time, but he was saying that perhaps what separates us from other creatures, other animals, is our ability to is our ability to like see and imagine different possibilities.
Mm.
And I'm like, but we just don't know. We just can't like how do we measure that in animals? Like, like the dog, does the dog not think like, oh, it will if I go down this path, then this will happen. And then they can choose, right? And then me, I have like the anxiety choice. Um, but to answer your question about, yeah, I mean, just thinking about the complicated nature of abusers and then abusers within a family, and then like my training and understanding of history, it's all so complicated. I
Mhm.
don't have anything like neat, like in a neat container to say about it, other than I'm constantly trying to understand my hurt, my rage, like the ugly feelings, right? The ugly feelings I was always told to hide. Like,
Mhm.
I don't want to hide them, but I want to understand where they come from when I'm in like a calmer state, right? And in order to do that, is to like ask, like, well, why did that person do that? Or why does that person act that way? Beyond just psychology, but it's also like, sure, there's like what the brain and then like the body chemistry, but then there's also just like, what does displacement do? What does war do? What does like multiple forms of colonialism do? What does like, various kinds of latent and visible racism do? Um, and like it's all a big like mess, right? And I'm not the only victim. My parents are victims, and they learned from their parents. And, so it's like, oh, I can see them as people. Um, and that helps me to like think about them. Whereas before, as a hurt child, I just like wanted to get away from them. And maybe the big distinction here is like I made a conscious choice to want to be in their life. Um, I know we're out of time, Allison, so I'll just finish this up. But like I made a conscious decision. I do want to be in their life. but I get to decide how. And in order to do that, it helps me to kind of understand a little bit of their context. Even if they might never fully understand me, that's okay, right? Um, and then where I can like play, like, I mean, I've never had that moment with my mother where we've like talked about who we would be. That's something that I think in my head, right? And I wish I could talk to my mother about how we could be, but I can write about it. I can render a speculative possibility. Um, And so there's a way in which that's a kind of reality too. But then my mother has read that, you know? And so there's a way in which we can share that memory, but not as an actuality, but as like a possibility that I tried to make manifest, you know? It's kind of weird. Anyway, um, I feel like the time really flew by, and I'm just like in awe of how you hear, listen, read, and just so grateful to be in conversation with you, Ashna. And I wish like I could just ask you like questions about your work too, but I guess we can do that too at Randolph.
Do that next
Allison, thank
time.
you again.
I am
Just
honored to be here to ask these questions and get a chance to, and
Mm,
that other people get to listen to you answer them as well.
Well, we'll
thank
have to definitely do another session, maybe when you can both talk
you.
about one another's work. Obviously, you're just uh, incredibly creative and cerebral individuals. I'm so struck by your candor and your bravery, Diana. And also, I think this book, which I encourage everyone to read, get a copy at your library or purchase a copy, is such a demonstration of what poetry can be, what
Mm,
poetry can do, and not just for the narrator and the writer, where you're working through some of these historical personal traumas, but for all of us, and where we recognize that there are different ways to approach what's going on in the world and in our lives, and just widening our perspective and giving us an appreciation. I have to say, I thought I'm kind of reminded of Adrian Piper a little bit when I read this, which is kind of like she goes from the graphic to the text, and you go
mm,
from the text to the graphic, but that intensity and how there's so much that's encompassed just kind of reminded me a little bit of her work. But I so appreciate that you both came on and uh, you know contributed so much to how we can think about things going forward, not just in the containers of this book, but beyond. Everybody to do please read this, and I look forward to bringing you both back again sometime. Maybe in person would be really nice as well. So thank you so much. Thank you, our audience, for being here. And once again, this is what poetry is all about. Thank you.
Oh, thank you, Allison.
Thank you, Allison.
And good
Good night,
night.
everyone.
Farewell. Bye.